Please note the following information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice. For any advice, please contact a lawyer. Welcome to episode 9 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on the strategies and techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage your global websites. In our last episode, we discussed how to navigate the IT line of death, where we had some great tips on getting your tickets approved. In this episode, we will discuss digital marketing service contracts and web effectiveness. Sometimes corporate lawyers get labeled as the sales prevention team because of the restrictions and the long contract reviews that they tend to bring into the process. But what if I told you that they could actually be a key asset to improving your web effectiveness? In this episode, we're going to dive into how to leverage contracts to your advantage, turning those legal reviews into opportunities and truly covering your butt. I've had the experience of being a sales manager and also a general manager in a pretty large corporation where I was trained and taught how to handle reviewing T's and C's, contracts, and negotiating. In all my experience, I really think that the best contract terms satisfy both parties, and there's usually nothing that can stop you from working together to come to an agreement. But there is a whole host of things that you need to know that may not be in the contract that can get you in a lot of trouble. Bill, we both have examples and know things people should think about when entering into contracts. Do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think the number one thing is removing ambiguity. Exactly like you said, what are we paying for? What are our expectations? And I find a lot of times people assume they're getting things that they may not be getting. And one of my, I dare to use the word favorite, an interesting example that I've experienced a number of times, especially post-audit. We'll do an audit for someone, especially back in the day, and we'll point out all these things, and especially if it's on a new website, and somebody will tell me, hey, why wasn't this built into our website? And one good example, I audited all the market websites for a company in a particular market. It was like 20 different brand sites, and half of them had just been rebuilt. And the agency they used was a big agency, and the agency during the negotiating process actually kept referring that they understood SEO, they knew SEO. And so this guy, the team that basically hired them and brought them in, assumed that they were going to get SEO or have SEO-friendly websites when they launched. And so, of course, I did the audit and found that that was not necessarily the case. And what was interesting is we're in the meeting and we had just finished like the 15th or 16th review, and it was the same stuff. And the agency rep happened to be walking down the hall, and they called him in and said, hey, this guy's just been tearing us up on these audits, and none of these sites are SEO friendly. And we thought you guys had SEO skills and were, experts in SEO. How come none of our sites have SEO, are SEO friendly? And he thought for a moment, put on his sales hat, and said, yeah, the contract wasn't for SEO to be in there.
Wow.
And we sell that as a separate module. And what happened there was the client was really upset and said, well, we'd expect you to build that into the equation. And it didn't. And anyways, they said, all right, we'll take this offline. We'll figure it out. The moral of the story is, you can't make assumptions. If you're expecting it to be SEO friendly, what I would include is, define any of those requirements. Now, one of the interesting things working with companies like big companies, almost every case, and I would guarantee this has been your experience, big companies on web development projects almost always require a compliance to their brand standards. You have to use our logo this way. You have to reference us this way. Many of them actually have tools that will go and check to make sure somebody didn't use the wrong logo and or the wrong way to reference the company name or in each market and stuff like that. And so if you're, buying these services, make sure that you've included that. Now, one of the things I recommend is, which again we did at P&G, was, and this we've talked about is corporate judo, getting some of the search best practices baked into the brand guidelines, like how to write title tags. You're not literally saying how to write a title tag, but the web page must be referenced by, and then you put those rules. And so this gets in the contract. And what's nice about being in the contract, and it is a dual-edged sword, on the agency side, you need to make sure that your implementation team has read the final contract, because if they say you've got to follow XYZ guidelines and you start building something, this is the cool thing from a client side with this contract is you can say, well, sorry, we required it to be search friendly or brand friendly or whatever, and it's not based on the standards written into the contract, and then they have to fix it for free. Just like this agency was protected because it wasn't contractually required for us to make it search friendly. So if you want it to be, we'll gladly sell you an SEO package after the fact. And interestingly, and again, this has always been my challenge, being part of WPP in the past, and that is, if we have this skill set, we could use it, but everybody, hey, we just want to sell something else. We want to take the whole nickel and diming approach to pricing, which is often why we have it as modules. So again, it can work for both parties. The agency as a protective mechanism. It can work for the client as a protective mechanism. And I think a key point you said, Bill, is it's got to be a win-win for both. It's got to be something that both parties agree to when they do it.
Yeah, I have a funny story. I was general manager of a company, and we were owned by a bigger company. And a salesman from the other company sold this big contract to it was an oil and gas company, and they were actually going to be classified as a hazardous waste site unless they cleaned up their discharge pond. This was an environmental company that I was working for. And they had to have $1.7 million contract done in 7 weeks to appease EPA. And the oil and gas company just would not give up on and this is something we haven't talked about yet. You definitely want to make sure that you're covering not just the outlining the services and deliverables, but the timelines. So they wanted a clause that basically would charge us per day penalties, like ridiculous number. And we were so confident in our delivery that we basically turned it around on them. And we said, we would only accept that if you accept a bonus clause for the same amount. They accepted it, and we delivered it a day early.
That's perfect. I
Yeah.
mean,
So
that's the interesting thing, those clauses like that, right? When it's punitive, people try to avoid that. And then, so yeah, I like the idea of being awarded. It's like here in Connecticut, whenever, it's funny when, we'll have I don't know, tanker truck catch fire and destroy an overpass. And they're like, oh, it's going to be 9 months to rebuild the bridge. And it's like, but we'll put $1 million a day, bonus in there for every day you deliver it, early or whatever. And magically they can build a bridge now in 6 weeks,
yeah.
or something like that. So the incentive goes both ways, as punitive and as an award. So interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So you also have some experience with the sale of companies to licensees, right?
Yeah, that's an interesting one that we see. And I've had a lot of experience on sort of the challenges of this with href Lang Builder. And I'll give you an example. If somebody were to buy, pick a brand, somebody like that's been brought by like a private equity, and then they basically sell off the pieces to licensees. And what they'll do is you might get 10 people that all pay the licensing fee to be able to use that brand name. And because they're independent licensees, like a franchise, it's same concept, but they have the license, let's say, for the United Arab Emirates or for the Philippines or France. And so that's their responsibility. Now, at the same time, they might use the same web infrastructure. They're obviously going to sell the same products and things like that. And because they're separate licensees, and there's probably 3 feet of contract language protecting the brand name, the brand image, the brand representation, there's nothing really from an e-commerce standpoint. And what I mean by that is we've had cases in a recent one was a licensee bought a license for the United Arab Emirates. And then about 4 months later, a licensee bought a license for Saudi Arabia. And two of the same brand, separate websites, both in Arabic. And Google was only taking one of them because it viewed them as the other one as duplicate. I mean, 100% mirror image. Well, not maybe not 100% because they didn't have all the same products. And we really couldn't reconcile this. Like you couldn't use hreflang tags because neither of these licensees would put the tags to the other site on their webpage. Because an SEO told them that that would be sending value to the guys in Dubai, and so it would help them. So don't cross-link it. Which okay,
Like
and then
that's not unusual for the winner to always, hoard the traffic.
oh, totally, and that was the case. The UAE guys, they were the beneficiary. They had the first Arabic site out there for this brand. They were the one ranking. And so when the Saudi team deployed their site, it was the same thing. They were being cannibalized. And because they were being cannibalized, they wanted to fix this. But there was nothing that could enforce it.
Hmm.
When they went back up to the owner of the brand said, sorry, I don't have access to their search console to map you guys as alternates of each other. You're sort of gonna have to work it out yourself. And the problem in this becomes now where, we're up to the mercy of Google. Again, they're using a top level domain that should have been good enough. But when you're 100% mirror image, in a way, what they started to do is change more of the content. But, how do you change the information for a shirt to where it's that materially different? Right. This is exactly the type of thing that hreflang can help you with. They're both in Arabic. Yes, they both, the one guy tried to change language, what it said and stuff, but it was still ended up being a problem. So one of the things we recommended was, could you, in your licensing deals, put in some language to say, look, especially when you're in same language markets like Arabic or English or French or Spanish, we need a way to play nicely because, and again, we could take it as a first come, first serve. Hey, the guy from Panama came in first, and if the guy from Chile came in 6 months later, it's his loss that the guy from Panama gets all the rankings for Spanish language versions of Spanish language queries. So that's what this is. And then I think there's other things too around forcing people to have consistency, like things like especially if they're using a CMS that you make available, consistent images. Maybe tell them, because you still own the brand at the end of the day. They're a steward of the brand in the market that they're licensing it. But so you probably have guidelines on the brand name, but you might want to have requirements on the images that they use. Are they using the right size image? Are they using images that represent the brand well? Like either, they might have an environment where people are on a beach playing volleyball if they're wearing like an outdoor leisure shirt or an athletic shirt or something. Things like that. I don't have all the answers, and we're actually working on both a white paper and some additional thoughts on the types of things you might want to include in your language. But simple things like, using a central search console. And I'm sure there's a dozen people that will argue, the hell with them. It's first come, first serve. Winner takes all, capitalism 101. But at the same time, we're in a way stacking a deck against people. And that I think the individual investors, as well as the brand company investors, may want to get a little bit more out of their returns. So that was just a very interesting place where there is a lot of contract language today, but very little about the type of things that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I would think that if a company's getting a residual, the mothership's getting a residual, they would want the right sites to rank in the right regions.
Exactly. And is there a level of arbitration? The guy that's not showing up in Google. And now again, if you don't rank, but if it is a cannibalization issue, and we can't even see that because we wouldn't have access to Search Console for Google to tell us that it picked A over B. And again, this is a little less common when we use CCTLDs, but as we've reported and as Google said, CCTLDs aren't as powerful a factor as they used to be. So that's why we're starting to see more of this, especially in same language markets. But yeah, it's that poor individual that, did the licensing. They bought the license so that they can generate revenue and hopefully a profit. And then same thing, the investors in the brand holder obviously are hoping that they can sell more so they make more money off of that residual. So it does seem that, those components should be very important and something we should definitely consider in the big picture.
Yeah, just to wrap this particular topic up, I think it's also important when you're looking at acquisitions and divestitures that, all the digital assets are included and you're protected to get them and you're the owner of that stuff. So that's really important. Hey, this is Bill Scully. We hope you're enjoying our conversations as much as we love bringing them to you. If you like what you hear, we would really appreciate it if you could take a moment and rate our podcast. Your ratings help us reach more listeners and keep the show going. Just head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts and give us a 5-star rating. Let us know what you think in a review section. It only takes a few seconds, but it makes a huge difference for us. Plus, we love hearing your feedback. Thanks so much for your support. I want to flip the topic here a little bit and talk about when you're purchasing agency services. So couple things. I think one thing that's really important, especially if you're buying services for ads, pay-per-click, whatnot, you want to be really clear and have the agency be transparent on the fees and the ad spends. You want to make sure that there's a cap. If you have a cap on a monthly spend, you also want to know what the fees are and how they're charging. I actually saw a crazy story of there was one company charging a 40% management fee for ads. And the company was wondering why they weren't getting all the traffic they had expected with the money they were spending. And it was because the fee was 40%. They didn't realize it wasn't in the contract, and you kind of out of luck if the contract was written and there's a guaranteed like 12 months or there's a buyout clause in there that you have to pay because of the upfront money done by the agency. That's one thing that people should be aware of. The other thing, I know you're a big fan of this, make sure that you own the data and the accounts. When you change agencies, does your reporting come with you, or do they own the reports? I've also seen some stories where agencies, maybe they were disgruntled, but agencies actually pulled their content back because they claimed ownership of the content. Have you ever run into that?
Yeah, I've seen that. The data side is one. I've seen one where in the last few days of the contract, they pulled down all the ads because they said that was their intellectual property. And then the mapping, the bid rules they were using was their intellectual property. So they took those down. But the ownership is the big one. Again, are they using your account or are you in their account? And I've seen some agencies want to charge big brands. Probably the most I ever saw was they wanted $2 million to basically release, their account to them. And so, a lot of people will bundle all these in the same management account. And so when that's gone, then all that history is gone and your ads restart from zero. So if you've got a few years history in there, you definitely want that to be there. So make sure you have ownership of that. I'm not as experienced in paid as you are, but definitely I've always recommended people that they use the company's account
Yeah.
as opposed to the agency's account. And that goes with Search Console as well. Like I just dealt with one yesterday where, they realized they didn't have access to it. And we were trying to look at some hreflang errors. And then they realized, oh, that was this, consultant who we used. And he doesn't reply to our email anymore. And I had another case where it took 9 months to cross-set all of the markets in the same Search Console account because almost every market was owned by an agency and they refused to give access or to do this or that. And so at the end of the day, we said, the hell with it. And the company owned all the domains. So they had the DNS manager go in and register them all at the DNS level and effectively taking away access from all of the agencies. So things like that, make sure that that's clear who owns it. But the creative side of this is an even bigger one because, again, that's intellectual property, it's creative rights. People will get creative when they're trying to either stick it to you or force you to, to renew with them. And so the more that that's covered, these little minute details, and the interesting thing is you may not be aware of this.
Right.
And I don't know that agencies, and we're not bashing agencies, agencies, again, if you believe that's your data, that's your intellectual property, that's your creative, then so state it and make that clear in the language so it protects you as well. That way,
Absolutely.
you're not going to arbitration to say, hey, this is, the 22,000 ads that we wrote for you, over the past 5 years, there are ads. We can easily strip your brand name out of them, but things like that, and a lot of that's covered with work for hire arrangements and things. And one other thing that I'm starting to see a little more now in independent contractor agreements are where they're asking you to put any technology or any ideas that you've brought forward. Like I just had one the other day. It was on a strategy piece from market entry where they wanted to know what intellectual property I have. Have I written things that could be converted to a product? Am I doing anything that could be converted to a product or solution that's trademarkable or patentable? Just so that I had my prior work documented, because they were very clear that anything that I did on their dime and on their time was their property. But if I had declared it in advance of that, they also, wanted a perpetual, license to that. So it's getting interesting now with these independent contractor agreements. But yeah, if it's not documented, it's not worth the paper it's written on.
Yeah, I've not from a purchasing standpoint, but I've seen clauses come in that says you can't work with any competitors. It's like, what, forever? You know,
Yeah. And I've had someone said you can't do this work for any industry, this type of work for anyone else. And it's like, did you read this? So
oh,
yeah, it's not saying you can't do it for these competitors, but you can't do it for anyone else.
right.
And it's like, okay, I can give you a fee for that exclusivity, but this little $10,000 project isn't going to exclude me from working with anybody else, for the rest of this time. So that's always interesting. The stuff people stick in there.
Yeah, and it doesn't cost anything for a lawyer to do that, and that's their blanket statement. And those are usually easily negotiated.
Yep.
Like a competitive thing, you could set a time date on it. You could also say, tell me who your competitors are, and I'll agree or not agree. Ways around that. So we talked about this a little bit, but like termination clauses, you want to understand what the notice period is. Like, let's say you just find out you don't get along for some reason. You want to have some sort of clause in there that says, you give me notice, I have so many days. There might be termination fees. There might be things that they charge because you terminate, or vice versa if you're on the order end. And you always want to know what happens to your data. It just helps avoid unexpected costs, and especially interruptions in service. Like you had mentioned, if these things, if someone's running an ad account under their account and you basically are no longer working together, you're going to have to start from scratch. And if you don't know how to do that, and you have to find a new agency and you have to get them up to speed, it might be months before you can get ads up again.
Yep,
I think,
exactly. Same thing with websites too, right? If
oh, good
somebody,
point.
breaks your website or puts some bad code in there or, doesn't, I mean, it's things we're seeing now. Like I've got two people that have approached me recently that have been blocked from Google, two friends that said, "Hey, I got blocked from Google." And it turned out that the person that built their website, for this their little side business, didn't have any security in there. We're using a bunch of freeware plugins and they got hacked. And then, this little side business, got zapped. All revenue comes to zero because this person didn't, they don't know. They're not a web
Right.
developer. And because of that, they didn't have any security. And so, they're at zero, revenue wise, and Google, they don't even know how to submit a review request. And then the person's like, you're on your own, you're not paying me anymore. So things like that, not everybody's going to know, but you want to think about what happens if you go down. I know, having built and sold a number of tools to people, almost every big company wants some sort of SLA that wants to know, if you're down for X, what's the compensation? What's a normal turnaround time to fix something or respond something? So things like that, I think, are really important to think about. One other one, you talked about termination, that I've never seen it in any agency contract, is what happens in the event of a material management change or an acquisition. Some big
Oh,
companies will have it in their terms of service or their portion of the contract that says they have the right to terminate your services if you're acquired, because you may actually, and I've had this when I was acquired the second time, we had to resign 3 or 4 clients because Ogilvy ended up was working with their biggest competitor.
uh,
So we, because of this, that almost immediately violated that contract. And that was language that they forced into the mutual contract. And so you want to make sure, at least note that. The other thing is jurisdiction, those type
yeah.
of things. But the big one is, what happens, because again, a lot of agencies get bought. And so do you have language in case that happens?
Final point about jurisdiction. I mean, I don't think 5% of the people recognize what that means, but if you get called to court, where is it going to be?
Right.
So, if you're a one-man band and you're in the Midwest and the company you're working with is in New York City and the jurisdiction is New York City, those are the laws. That's where the case is going to take place.
Yep.
And, you might need to make 8 or 9 trips to New York if it comes to that.
And actually, I have a book on my shelf. I'm trying to find the name of it. It's basically the strategic opportunities of legal contracts. And in one of my grad school courses on contracts, it was interesting, things like that. There is, depending on the size of your company and the nature of your business, there are very strategic places for jurisdiction. So Delaware, obviously, there's a lot of companies registered there, and they're one of the better in terms of being able to interpret law. New York is a big one. When you get into international, there's, do you do London? Do you do Hong Kong? Do you do New York? There's interesting strategies behind that and the wording of it. And again, that was like half of an entire semester was talking just about those 3 or 4 components of jurisdiction and where, and different nuances related to acquisitions and things like that, again, we're not lawyers, so we're not
No.
giving legal advice, but definitely think about that. Like, I think, Bill, your example, if you're in Kansas City and they want you to come to New York City or London, to basically sue them, then that changes the dynamics a little bit. And it's sort of hard when you're a small shop trying to get, somebody like IBM to want to come to a Kansas City court or
Mhm.
a Midwest. It's probably not going to happen. But just something to think about. Again, that's the reconciliation and negotiating process for the contract. So yeah, all good stuff. It's just, again, the whole purpose of this was, try to figure out ways that you can leverage this to your advantage as opposed to being disadvantaged by this.
Yeah. And I would say to your advantage, and everybody understand and accept the terms. All right, great. Any final thoughts?
No, that's about it. It's just one more of the tools in the toolbox that you can use to think about how, to improve, add this into your web effectiveness toolbox so that you get the best deal and the best protection and the less ambiguity as you move forward with different vendors.
Great. Thanks. And so, everybody think about your contracts, make sure there are clearly definable deliverables. You have full transparency on fees and ad spends. You want to make sure that you're the owner of your data and the accounts. And, another thing would be review the termination clauses so that you both know how to terminate and there's a process there. All right. Thanks, Bill.
Cool. Thanks. I just want to remind you to come check out the free Facebook group, post any questions you have about this episode and any of the other episodes, ideas for other things we should talk about. And we also want to talk about the training at International Web Mastery. We have a variety of them. We've got a number of courses on hreflang, building business cases, and we're adding 2 or 3 more over the coming weeks related to some of the most recent topics. So come check them out. Some are free. Some you can subscribe to. And if there is a topic you'd like us to do training on, please let us know.
Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.